Hello everyone, I'm Krasia Tasio, and I will talk again about the coronavirus and my new astrological findings. I made one video about the coronavirus, and there I was talking about the reason behind its outbreak, and I was also talking about its possible development. Now, 2-3 weeks after that, I made research on other pandemics and diseases which were known to humanity since 13th, 14th centuries. And 3 of them are very, very significant. There were many viruses and epidemics in the world, all over the world, but my research was mainly on those that were called pandemic. Like we had in the 14th century, the Black Plague, we had in 1918, we had the Spanish flu, and then I heard also about SARS, which is another type of coronavirus, which was known in 2002, 2003, and I found amazing statistical significant correlation between them, which is showing the reason behind its outbreak and also what is the possible development of the disease, which is what I want to show you now. I think this is amazing, significant knowledge, very, very interesting and very, very important. And of course, you know that I'm using the fixed sidereal Babylonian zodiac, and I'm mainly working with knowledge which comes from the most ancient Babylonian sources, which would say that in ancient Babylon, people would not look only at aspects and transits, but they would mainly look at the heliacal phases of the planets, but also the planetary periods and phases. This is a bit different from the periods known to the Vedic astrology. We're talking about planetary periods or rising times. We will look into this, but more interestingly, I will tell you who, according to the ancient Babylonian knowledge, is sitting behind all diseases and why people would fear this planet the most. Of course, this was Mars. Mars was Nergal, the god of the netherworld, the god who is ruling the dead, who is ruling the underworld. So it is Nergal, and people would fear him the most. Saturn, they wouldn't fear that much. Saturn and the Saturnian influences are predictable. They were predictable. They're always associated with what is expected from us due to lack of discipline or moral values. These things you know. But with Mars, it's a bit complex. With Mars, not all the time we can predict his influences, especially when he's in certain heliacal phases. Now, what are the heliacal phases? The heliacal phases of the planets are the phases in relation to Helios, the sun. That's why we call it heliacal phases. So when one planet is hidden in the rays of the sun, becomes invisible, the nature of the planet is changed significantly. It becomes totally different. It has very different principles to appear, to show us. Then when the planet is appearing for the first time after gaining significant distance from the sun, this is the first appearance of the planet, and then this is another meaning. Then the planet is symbolically born and has these powerful energies of youth, and such planet is very, very powerful. Then we're having phases when the planet is just about to disappear in the rays of the sun, and many, many different meanings. We also know to look whether the planet is a morning star or an evening star. And now this is changing very, very much the influences of the planets. Why am I saying this? Because we are not only looking at the planetary aspects like we looked at the significant conjunction between Saturn and Pluto. Yes, very, very significant, life-changing, bringing change, bringing transformation, and yes, it maybe partially behind the outbreak of this man-made disease, for sure. This is one significant reason, but it's not only reason. Mars. Mars was the planet who rules these diseases, natural disasters, sudden with unexpected nature. Mars is ruling the infections and diseases, and there is no other planet that would rule the virus, which is known now like the coronavirus. It is Mars. And Mars being the main significator of this disease, I found some very interesting repetition of the planetary position of Mars during the outbreak of these 4 important pandemics since the 14th centuries. And I will show you the charts of all 4. Now, what here is very, very interesting. Yes, and just to remind you, I am not, by no means, I'm using the tropical modern zodiac. I'm using fixed sidereal Babylonian zodiac. And if you want to use the same planetary stellar positions, you may, if you go to astro.com, you opt for sidereal zodiac, equal house system, and then you choose the Aya Namsha of Fagan Bradley Aya Namsha. Then you will receive the images that I will show you in a second. So diseases, which outburst, which show up, disasters of such nature are always ruled by Mars. Mars is God Nergal. He is ruling the netherworld. He's ruling the kingdom of death, and he's ruling it. So, like I told you, the ancients would fear him tremendously because of his unpredictability. Also because his cycle and his rising times can also show some differences, which is not typical for the cycle of Mercury, of Saturn, or for the cycle of Venus, for example. So he was called the unpredictable planet. Now, I will share my screen with you, and then you will see my interesting findings. All right. Now, let's start far in the past. This is the Spanish flu. Let's see. This is 2003. And I want to show you first the one that is the most distant. And this is the Black Plague or plague, which appeared for the first time in the autumn of 1346, and which actually was torturing the humanity for like 50, 60 years or more. What you see here is something amazing. Like I said, this is the astronomical zodiac. Literally, this is the situation on the sky. First of all, you see, now we, of course, cannot be sure about the exact month. But what I found is that it was somewhere in the autumn. And that's why I'm using last days of October. But what we found here is the sign of Scorpio and Mars in Scorpio and invisible. Now, what is this to tell you? Mars, of course, is ruling Scorpio. You can think that because he's ruling Scorpio, he will not be bad, he will not be evil in Scorpio. Well, I am not sure, because in the sign of Scorpio, he is very, very powerful, and he is doing what he is meant to do. And his nature is to bring diseases, to bring infection, to bring natural disasters. Mars is in Scorpio, but not only in Scorpio, he is in the vicinity of a very powerful royal star, which is Antares. Antares is in the 15 degrees sidereal astronomical Scorpio, one of the 4 royal stars, which is very, very bright, which is very, very red, which is extremely powerful and not necessarily good. It is the star of the army leader, extremely powerful star. And since Mars is ruling Scorpio, being in conjunction with this powerful star in the stomach of the Scorpion, of the celestial Scorpion, he receives additional powers to do what he is known to do. And this is happening in the 1346, when we had the whole world suffering from pandemic. And this pandemic was took very long. I forgot how many decades, but it was something very dramatic. And as you can see also, Mars is invisible. This is even more enhancing his unpredictability of hidden diseases. The invisible Mars can bring hidden diseases such that cannot be treated, cannot be diagnosed, are never being discovered on time. So this is problematic. And this is Mars in his own sign of Scorpio. So as you can see, Mars in his own sign of Scorpio is extremely powerful. His nature in his own sign of Aries will be very different. Now, let's continue and see the next one. I think the next one will be the Spanish flu in 1918. I found that the Spanish flu again appeared in the autumn, interestingly. And look what we see here. Where is Mars? In Scorpio, in the vicinity of Antares. The same story. Always when I will tell you also about the cycle of Mars, but I want to make it first simple, and then I will explain you about the cycle of Mars. Again, the Spanish flu, and Mars is appearing in the sign of Scorpio, again in the vicinity of Antares. First, here to make a very big bracket, how we date appearance of some mundane event, or be it disease or whatever mundane worldwide historical event, not by its first appearance in certain country, but at the moment when it's been announced, seen, and known by people. It's like, imagine when you will be looking in astrology at certain disease which you want to diagnose and you want to see how the disease will develop, you take the so-called you look first at the moment when it's being diagnosed, or when the first time the doctor would see it and diagnose it. Then you create the chart, not when the patient would have his or her first complaints. The same is the story with these diseases. Why am I saying this? Because of this very interesting, date of SARS. Again, discovered in China. SARS is a type of coronavirus, what I read. And in 2002, Mars was not in Scorpio. And in 2002, I read that somewhere in, I think in the autumn again, the disease was discovered in China, and the information about this was only known to China in Chinese. So the information remained hidden and was not spread via the media internationally. Later on, in the beginning of 2003, in January, the world received translated, probably in English, information about the disease, and then the disease was spread all over the world and had pandemic nature. And guess what? Mars was in Scorpio, conjoined in the vicinity of Antares, the same star, which has very, very powerful nature. By the way, Antares is not always bad. But with Mars, apparently, Antares gives additional powers to Mars. Even here you can see the exalted Jupiter didn't help much. Maybe actually it helped, because later on, in 2004, this disease was forgotten by the world. So it didn't spread and didn't last for so long. And now we come to our time, 2020. And we know that the first cases were announced again in China, not known to everyone. This didn't become so publicly announced, and the world was not so much interested in the coronavirus until we started hearing in January. And by the way, it was the entrance of Mars in Scorpio was in the beginning of January. And on the 17th of January, or we can look even before that, but a few days before, like if we want to use the same statistics like when we looked at the previous 3 cases, Mars is again not in the vicinity but in exact conjunction with Antares. So we're having here something very, very severe, extremely powerful. Another thing I will tell you is that since Mars is the main significator of diseases, of spreading of diseases, of infections and disasters of such nature, certainly it is important, of course, to look at Pluto. I wouldn't certainly, even though the ancients had specific reasons not to look at Pluto, Uranus and Neptune, I certainly believe that now we should look also at the phases and the transits of Pluto, very important, but also because Pluto is ruling together with Mars the sign of Scorpio. But it is important, of course, to look at every movement of Mars in order to be able to specifically to predict the development of this disease and how far it may go. Now, I will tell you about the phases of Mars. The rising times, every planet has rising times which are known to the Babylonian astrology. The rising times are the average, on average, the time of the heliacal appearance of one planet on the very same place, in the very same sign. For example, every 8 years, Venus is appearing from the rays of the sun, heliacally, in one very same sign. Every 8 years, she's repeating her position with only a few small degrees of difference, but she will appear in the same position. She was hidden in the rays of the sun, and every 8 years she becomes visible and she appears in the same sign. And this is her rising rising time, excuse me. Mars is also having, of course, like every other planet, a rising time. But because of his not perfectly predictable course, his rising time varies from 15 to 17 years. Therefore, we can expect that the diseases are being repeated every 15 to 17 years. Another thing, and yes, when we look at 2003, we have in cycle 17, and we have complete repetition of the appearance of Mars, of his course, and therefore we're having SARS, and now we're having this disease. But another interesting thing, if we want to follow up the course of Mars, then we'll be able to follow up the development of the disease. And of course, like I told you in my previous video, we need to look, but I'll make separate, I don't want to get so much off topic because it's a very large subject, but I will make a separate video on the real new year, when we'll be seeing the first lunar crescent, which is marking the beginning of the next new year. And this will show how the disease will develop. But another thing before that, which also has very, very significant importance, is to follow the path, of course, of Mars. On 9th of February, Mars entered the sign of Sagittarius. What is Mars doing in the sign of Sagittarius? Here I have to open a big bracket and explain you something. See, this is Mars here on the 17th of January is in Scorpio. On 9th of February, he entered the sign of Sagittarius, and he will be staying in Sagittarius until 23rd of March, and then he is entering Capricorn. And here I will tell you what my thoughts are. What is the sign of Sagittarius meaning for Mars? Now, in Sagittarius, Mars is very powerful for two very important reasons. This is his own triplicity, the fire element. So Mars in Sagittarius is very powerful. And here is to tell you that Mars being powerful doesn't mean that he's good. It means that he's gaining power, but in a different way. So we have to think what happened on 9th of February when he changed signs. What happened to the disease? To tell you honestly, I don't remember. I remember that a few days after, they announced that the number of sick people rose because they have new methods of diagnosing the disease. So actually the other thing is that we do not know the real situation, and we will never find it out. And this is basically because also of the powerful influences of Pluto, Saturn together, and Saturn, also the invisibility of Saturn. So you can see that we will never be able to know the real picture. We can only guess what is going on. And I can tell you that at this edge moment, like Mars entering, changing sign, certainly there were change in the course of the disease, and most probably there were increase in the cases of sick people, because Jupiter can be helpful, can have healing powers, so can help, because Jupiter is also in Sagittarius, so can help a disease to remedy for this, against this disease to be discovered. But I am not sure how powerful this can be, because Pluto is also here, and also because Mars in the sign of Sagittarius is extremely powerful. Why powerful? Not only because this is his own triplicity, because it's a fire sign and there he's at home, but it is because you know that astronomically, due to the precession, and we are having the so-called tropical points where we're having the equinoxes and the solstices. And here in Pisces, we're having the point of the vernal equinox. Why? Because statistically, the first lunar crescent, which marks the beginning of every year, is appearing always around the 5 degrees of Pisces. And this is due to the precession cycle of the Earth, which is circulating around her own axis. But this is another story. I'm just telling you that the vernal equinox for our era is in the sign of Pisces, and this is the mini astronomical era, which is lasting about 2,500 years, which would say we have a cross, you know, the equinoxes and the solstices, which would say that the spring solstice is in the 5 degrees of Gemini, the autumn equinox is in the Virgo, and the winter solstice is in Sagittarius. Of course, this is for the northern hemisphere. This will be completely reversed for the southern. But in any case, these were the equinoxes, vernal or autumn, depending on which part of the world you are, and these are the solstices, winter or summer. So look at this place here. This is, we know that the god Nergal is exalted in Capricorn. This is indeed his ideal exaltation space, and we know the hidden place of Nergal, and we know that in Babylon people would have ideal place, ideal example for everything, ideal lists of ideal exaltation, of ideal everything. They would have such culture and notion. But for our era, and for in Babylon, for this era, for their era, the winter solstice was in Capricorn. For our era, the winter solstice is in Sagittarius. So for our particular era, apart from the ideal exaltation place of Mars in Capricorn, we are having Sagittarius as place where Mars is feeling very well, because here is where the sun reaches its lowest point, and here Nergal descends into the netherworld. So what is this to say? At the moment when Mars entered Sagittarius, not only that he is in his own triplicity and in his own fire sign. But until 23rd of March, he will be in the netherworld, where he belongs to, where he is gaining power. So I am not sure how innocent he will be towards us and the spreading of the disease. On the 23rd of March, he is entering Capricorn, his ideal place of exaltation. Here my hopes are that there will be some restraints or the limitations, certain limitations of the spreading of the disease, because Saturn will be there. Yes, this is a place where Mars is very powerful. He is ideally, powerfully, perfectly exalted in his hidden place. But my hopes are that Saturn will put some limitations or restraints. Because if you look in the ancient texts, what people say about the conjunction between Saturn and Mars, this is certainly not a good, not an easy conjunction, and certainly brings dangers into people's lives. But here is the but. They say that people can become very practical, very structured, and the fire nature of Mars can be structured. My hope is that the fire nature of Mars, who is bringing and spreading this disease, will be kind of limited and structured with the powers of Saturn. And here maybe some sort of structure will be implemented either via putting some control over the disease or via finding a remedy or something. But my hope is that here Mars will be kind of limited. He is staying here for a while, and after he enters the sign of Aquarius, I hope that he will be a bit more limited as well. Now, of course, we shouldn't forget what we spoke about in the previous video, that Saturn-Pluto conjunction was a powerful, like oil in the fire. It was helping this disease to outburst and to become known to the people in such dramatic way. So this is still valid, and it takes a while until the energies of this conjunction are being worked out. But still, my hope is that if we only follow the course of Mars, we will already see how the disease is developing, and my hopes are that after end of March, which is coinciding with the beginning of the new celestial period, with the new, I'm hoping that this will be positive. This will bring positive direction in finding a remedy or fighting this virus. So your comments are welcome. If you have additional knowledge, it will be, of course, welcome and very, very useful, because this is something that it's not easy to analyze statistically because of these events historically so far in the past. But you're very welcome if you have numerological knowledge, if you made your own research, or if you have knowledge of numerology or even tarot, whatever information you have will be very, very useful if you would like to share it. So thank you for your attention.